Hello everyone, this is Bradley. This is a animation node fundamental tutorial, but it's also a part of animation node AN-I&C, so-called instancing and the collection. So today's topic is to discuss how to put animation node instances into collections. So here's kind of very basic setup that you have 6 nodes. 2 of them are my presets that you can download from the preset library, which is also free on Gumroad. It's kind of very simple. You just randomly distribute all these objects on this plane. Yeah, kind of very simple, completely procedural. But that's not the point today. Today's point essentially is if I'm using object instance to instance these cube and sphere. Okay, and many times in reality, for practical use, that I usually construct a scene, and sometimes I want to render the different view layer for object buffer. Okay, so I only would like to render the cubes in the scene, so that maybe I would like to change all this color of the cube in compositing, or I would like to change the color of only sphere in compositing, and so on and so forth. Kind of things that will happen if you're considering compositing. But animation node always create objects or always instance objects in an collection which is called animation node object container. Is that full name? Yes, it's called animation node object container. So it means if you disable this collection, you disable everything. Okay, so you don't have ability to create object buffer if all these objects are in this single container. But you also do not have other ways, because if you try to move all this kind of cube to other places, and soon as if you just save up your files and reopen the files, and it goes back to the original location where everything has been created in this animation node object container. So this turns to be a very huge problem. So how can we? So many times you might probably think, how can I actually put all these objects into a collection? Can I actually decide their destination? And it's actually, yes, there is a method. What we need to do is kind of simple. I'm just going to hit Control A and search for collection operations. And I'm going to duplicate this name, put the objects into object sockets. So currently nothing happened because we need to define the destination. So let's create 2 collections, and the one is called cube, and the other let's call sphere. So let's select the cube into cube and sphere into sphere. So immediately we can find the cube's objects are in the cube collection and the sphere objects are in the sphere collection. The reason that you do not see the reason that the name does not match to the sphere is that I didn't copy full object. If you don't copy full object, then the name or the other settings like modifier constraint won't be copied. So this is the idea. But sometimes if there is no modifier, I just don't copy full object to save the power. Because if you copy full object, it's also copy information. So more information has to be considered and so on and so forth. Yeah. Another thing that I want to remind you is what you will find is that the animation node object container still contains this amount of objects. So you may raise some concern that, now it's not only to have 7 cubes, but there's 14 cubes in total. But this is actually not right, because you do realize they have the same name, which means they are actually the same object. If you work with Blender a lot, then you will know that Blender does not allow multiple objects to have the same name. So whether you Shift D or Alt D, you always create objects of different names. This is because Blender does not allow multiple objects to have the same name. When they have the same name, it means they are the same object. What's actually happened in this case is it's the same object that has been placed into different collection. And what's behind the curtain is if you go to this object panel, and within the collection you can find this object has been placed into animation node object container and another collection which is called a cube. But essentially it's just this is whole story. So basically, these are really the same objects being placed into two different collections, and it's just unavoidable that the object instance node will always put the object into this animation node container, regardless what happens. But to satisfy the requirement that we need object into a different collection, then we have this collection operation that has linked the object into another collection. And in order to create object buffer, what we need to do is just to disable this container. And then you can create a new layer. So let's copy settings, and we can disable the cube. Let's disable the original location. So this new view layer is only outputting this floor and the sphere. And within the original view layer, we can name that as a cube. You can make that only output the cube, and so on and so forth. This is kind of way to think about that. Of course, the real buffer should not look like this, because in reality, the sphere should block in the cube, and some cube should block in the sphere. So render out all these kind of objects individually is not what you want. But you get the kind of idea, so you can play around with all these kind of settings. And I want you to realize, and you probably realize this already, that if I disable this object container, then this cube visibility depends on whether I disable this cube collection or not. And I want to remind you, if you disable this cube and sphere collection, but if you re-enable the visibility of this container collection, then both cube and sphere will be visible again. So what it means is disable one collection. So once you have the linkage, use this collection operation node, disable one collection, either of the collection that you choose, is not enough to disable the object's visibility in the render and the viewport. So you have to disable both. It's just like the difference of the cube and the sphere. If you re-enable this animation nodes container, then the sphere appear again. It's because you need to disable both container and the sphere in order to disable the sphere. If the cube is enabled, then cube will be rendered. And if you enable both, no. So this is all about it. One last thing that I would like to add is, in this tutorial, we're talking about object instance nodes for most of the time. But the object instance node is never the only way to instance the object. As I mentioned in my instancing in animation nodes tutorial, so you can find the link on the right upper corner. There is another method that I've specifically made a preset to, which is called the instancing objects. And here what we need to do is basically just to select this cube and take a mesh objects output. So now at this moment we're having Z findings. Let's take a look. Where's my my target objects is here. So now we have a target objects, and this is basically the instances, and we can definitely just select the same materials as the original one. So now we have our duplication, and this is kind of a very unique feature that does not occur in Cinema 4D, that you can have multiple mesh within the same object, and this is the method that we're instancing. And since we're only creating a single object, and this object is free from is a little bit independent from animation nodes, that you can add all this kind of modifier if you want. You can add a and you can add a constraint, particle system, or even potentially physics, probably. Basically, what happens is that you can just place that into collection freely. So you don't necessarily to use the collection operation unless you try to do some kind of procedural stuff or automatic stuff. Otherwise, you just directly place that into object. So this is another way of thinking. But sometimes you just have to choose whether you're using object instancer or instancing mesh object. There are pros and cons within these two methods, and I probably have discussed it already in our original tutorial. So this is it. This is really all about it. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll probably see you next time. Bye bye.